Welcome to Pack Talk Podcast, episode 150. Today we're talking about a topic that I've been thinking about for a while, did some research into, because I went through some things myself in 2025. I'm going to share with you today, but today's topic is, how do dogs grieve, or do dogs actually grieve? Whether we're talking about, today we're going to mainly talk about losing another one of your dogs, how your dog deals with that. But it's going to be very similar to if your dog loses, like their owner. Like, let's say, for example, you have a family member that has a dog, then your family member passes away, unfortunately. Then they have a dog. Maybe you take that dog in. How could you interpret the way that they grieve? And we do know that dogs absolutely do grieve, and understanding how they grieve can help you support them through one of the hardest times of their life. And today we're going to break down what the research tells us about canine grief. We're going to talk about the signs that maybe your dog is struggling with grief. And we're going to talk about the steps you can take to help them heal. Now, with that being said, understand every dog is different. So if you have a story about this, I'd love to hear it. If you're comfortable leaving a comment on the YouTube channel, wherever you're listening to this, all the podcast videos are going to be on the YouTube channel on the podcast tab. If you go to this podcast on the YouTube channel podcast tab, you want to tell your story, please leave it there. I'd love to read those. But myself in 2025, I lost 2 dogs. So I had 3 dogs. Bane, he's a Doberman. Georgia was a Doberman. And Sarabi, she was a mutt. And so I had 3 dogs. And in February-ish, 2025, or a little bit after February, actually, it was like after spring break. So it must have been April-ish, February or April-ish 2025. Sarabi's health, she was 15 years old, started degrading. And, she had been getting old and moving slowly. But one weekend, I remember she started throwing up, started having, diarrhea in the house, things that were not normal for her. We took her to the ER vet, and they found that she had very aggressive liver cancer. And Sarabi had already been getting treated for DCM. She had DCM, which is essentially where the heart is failing. So she had been getting treated for that for years, but the DCM actually isn't what, essentially where she ended. It was due to liver cancer that was quickly taking over her liver. And so we found that out at the ER vet. Of course, we asked for all options. The other option, and the vet at the ER recommended euthanasia because the progress that the cancer had taken. He said it was very uncomfortable, that even if we attempted surgery to remove the mass, the liver wouldn't survive. But the other option was do an MRI or a CAT scan, see exactly where the cancer was, and then potentially look into surgery. But her health was degrading so fast that was not really a good option. So we did choose to, euthanize her at that point in time. And, all dogs are different. Obviously, humans are grieving. I remember, because my wife had taken her to the ER. And so I had our kids. We drove to the ER. We all sat there in the yard with Sarabi for a while. Everyone's crying and everything. We went into the room. We're there with her. They put her to sleep. She falls asleep. The kids are crying, I'm crying, my wife's crying, everybody's crying. Very emotional, right? Especially for humans. And we were, struggling for weeks after that, right? And still now when I think about it, I get kind of emotional. We have to understand the difference between us and dogs. Dogs and humans operate completely differently, which we'll talk about today. But, my other dogs, Bane and Georgia, Bane did seem to be a little bit confused about why she just wasn't around anymore. And I'll tell you some of the things that I found in my research while looking into this topic as we move forward here. But Bane, he had been with Sarabi the longest ever since he was a puppy. He had been around Sarabi. Georgia came into our lives a little bit later. But he did seem a little bit confused that she wasn't around, going to the normal spots that she'd be laying at, sniffing. Apparently, if I was a human thinking about this, I would say that he was looking for her. Who knows if that's what he was actually doing or not. But he was definitely sniffing the spots, going to the spots where she was at, those kind of things. Georgia just, she didn't really seem to notice or care at all. And every dog's different. Every dog's an individual. Every dog's going to deal with things a little bit differently. Well, a couple months later, middle of the night, one night, Georgia started, trying to remember exactly, like it was like coughing, panting, heavy coughing. I got up, I took her to the ER. She was in heart failure, DCM, right? We had no idea. She was 7 years old. I was planning on getting her to our cardiologist that had seen Sarabi, looked at Bane, right? I was planning on taking her to that cardiologist that year. Hadn't been able to do it yet. Anyway, she goes into heart failure, go to the ER. They treat her there. The next day, I go to the cardiologist. He continues to treat her, Dr. Jake Jacobson. He's been on the podcast before. Amazing team, Charleston Veterinary Cardiology. So I was at his office for probably 6 hours because she was so full of fluid that he was doing lots of injections to basically pull that fluid out of her and try to get her heart rate stabilized. So we were able to get her stable, sent her home on a heavy dose of pharmaceuticals to help us keep everything in check. And I want to say, a couple weeks went by, and then she passed away in her sleep, which, talking to Dr. Jake, was due to an arrhythmia, which is basically an irregular heartbeat. I'm very glad that she passed away in her sleep. She was still curled up in her spot next to me on the floor, like she had a little bed on the floor that she would lay on next to my side of the bed. And so she was right there. I had gotten up, to go to the gym in the morning, and boom, found her just like that. So anyway, those are my two experiences. Whenever Georgia passed away, Bane was the remaining dog. He still is. He's still with us. And, I remember my wife asking me, does he care? Does he know? And I'm like, I don't know, right? Because, we're not in the dog's mind. Everything that we do, we are looking at all the signs. We're looking at our experience. We're looking at our knowledge to read that dog, understand that dog, right? And I remember him going up to George's body after she had passed away and sniffing it. And then basically he just went about his business, right? So there were some times and a couple of days after that where it's usually a scenario that him and Georgia would be doing something, and he was looking around, like expecting her, like especially outside, expecting her to be next to him or expecting her to come up to him, or if he was looking around to play with her, and she just wasn't there, right? So did he seem to grieve? Not really, because he was eating normal, acting normal, but there was these situations, just like when Sarabi passed away, that he seemed a little bit confused as to why they weren't there or why the situation was a little bit different. However, I know a lot of the people that I've worked with who have had dogs pass away, and their other dog grieved heavily, stopped eating, stopped moving, right? Go over to the other dog's little bed in the house, lay down on that bed. So every dog grieves differently. Every dog interprets information differently. So that's kind of what got me looking into this topic. And of course, when your pet is passing away, you're looking for all the information you can about how does it affect your other dogs, what are your other pets thinking, these kind of things. So I figured this information would be good to talk about today. So with that being said, some of the things I'm going to cover today, I'm going to talk about what the science says. There were some actual, I was able to find some recent research that tells us, at least the dogs they studied in the research, what the dogs are experiencing, like what the grief responses are. Also, the research tells us a little bit about how the dog's brain processes loss differently than humans, which makes complete sense with our knowledge of dogs. And then potential biological changes that happen when the dog loses a companion. We will talk briefly about recognizing grief in your dog, such as some behavioral changes that you might notice after your loss, physical symptoms, how to tell the difference between grief and a potential medical issue. And as always, if you work with a trainer or if you have a good relationship with a trainer or a vet and you're going through this, it's always a good idea just to give them a call. Give them a call, tell them what's going on. See, especially if you have a trainer that knows your dog. Because if you've ever worked with a trainer where your trainer has done a board and train with the dog, the trainer is very intimately knowledgeable about your dog specifically and their individual characteristics because of the time they spent with your dog, so they can give you real insight into their behavior. A vet typically sees your dog for an hour here or 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, so they can give you some generalities, but they won't know your dog on the level that a trainer has who's done extensive time with your dog. So that's just something to think about. If you're not sure what your dog's doing, go ahead, give your trainer a call, talk to them. People do it with us all the time. So let's talk real quick about the science of canine grief. I did a bunch of research. I looked at a bunch of studies, but I wanted to break it down super simple for you and just kind of give you the highlights. So there was this one study that Italian researchers did. It was in 2022. And if you're interested in the links to these studies, just let me know in the comments on the YouTube channel, and I'll put the links in the comments of the podcast there. But there's some Italian researchers. They did a study on 426 dogs. They found that 86% reported negative behavioral changes in surviving after a companion's death. And how do we know that it's real grief? So they were doing all these tests and looking at everything, and they saw that the dogs could show the same biological markers. They saw elevated cortisol, lowered oxytocin, and changes in brainwave patterns. So that's how they were kind of linking that the dogs are actually grieving to the event after a companion's death. So, this brings up a good point. What is one of the biggest differences between dog grief and human grief? Because when your dog dies, you will grieve. That's part of the process, right? And if you don't grieve, well, I won't even say that. I'll just say it's expected that you grieve. It's totally fine. It's totally okay. But humans grieve because they think about the past. They think about the future. They think about everything that happened. We have memories. Dogs, they don't really have memories like we do. We already know that. But what they do have is they have social structure. So like your pack structure in your home, the hierarchy in your home, the social interactions in your home or in your living situation. And then they have routines and rituals, right? And part of those routines and rituals are the other pets. And this could even be from like if you have a dog and a cat and the cat passes away. Or if you have a dog and like a bunny and they have a good relationship and the bunny it could be any social animal. So, the routine is changing, the social structure is changing. So that is kind of modifying the dog's behavior, right? The research has shown, which we know this from everything we've looked into before and our understanding of dogs, that dogs have a minimal concept of death. That means that they know that something is different. They know that their friend isn't responding, but they don't understand forever. So if you think about my story where my dog Georgia passed away, she passed away in her sleep. She's laying on the floor in her curled up position on her bed. My other dog Bane goes up to sniff her. He doesn't have a concept of death. He knows that something's different. He knows that she's not responding. He doesn't understand forever. Now, what I do believe is that when they go up, like let's say they go up to their companion, they don't smell the same, right? When they've passed away. They don't smell the same. There's no heartbeat. There's no breathing. I think the dog does register those things for sure. But the dog doesn't understand forever, right? So it's one of those things that, based on the research and my own belief, they know something's changed, right? They know something's different, but they don't really understand it. And so there was another study in 2024 that discovered that dogs and their companions actually sync their brain waves. And so, if you have one or more dogs, or if you have two or more dogs living in the same house or in the same family, their brain waves are going to sync up. And so when one of the dogs or one of the animals passes away, those brain waves have to recalibrate without the other one being there, which is super interesting. But it kind of makes sense. It goes hand in hand with routines and rituals. We know that dogs thrive on routine and ritual, right? They thrive on daily habits, daily things that we're doing. And so when that changes, right, they're going to have to recalibrate and adapt. And our dogs are highly adaptable, but that might take some time. And it might take more time for one dog than another dog. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that's kind of the science behind it. It makes sense with what we know about dogs already. And if you've ever had a dog passed away, you probably are thinking, yep, that makes sense with what I've seen. But what are some signs that your dog is grieving? So first of all, one of the things that some people report are that their dog is doing searching behavior. The dog keeps going to places where the deceased pet used to be, their bed, their favorite spot, looking out the window. Again, this aligns with my personal experience in the story that I told you with both my first dog, Sarabi, passing away, my other dog, Bane, going to her areas that she would normally rest at or lay at or hang out at, and seeming to look for a horse, sniff for her, whatever. And whenever Georgia passed away, in his routine and ritual, like for example, being in the yard, looking around for her, right? Now, I don't know if that's actually searching for her or if that's just the habit is so strong of that interaction that that's what he's expecting. And that's part of the adaptation process. Now, other people, you listening, you might have a very sensitive dog to social abilities or social interactions. And so you might see more searching behavior. You might see more grief than I've seen in my own dog, right? So again, as I'm going through this, think about your dog, think about what you've experienced. Or if you haven't experienced, if you have multiple dogs and you haven't experienced the loss of a pet yet, this at least gets you thinking about, things to think about when that time does come. Now, there could be some changes that you notice with your dog, vocalization changes. There could be some whining, howling, making sounds your dog doesn't normally make. Howling is generally, a sound of vocalization that is linked to trying to rally the pack, get the pack together. So if you start seeing some unusual howling, that's what that could be potentially. Loss of appetite. I did not see this myself, but the research that I looked into, 32% of the dogs in the research, the grieving dogs did refuse food, even high-value treats they normally love, for a period of time. So that is something to note that could happen to your dog. So we'll talk about how you can work around that here coming up shortly. Sleep disruption. So some dogs in the study, they reported pacing at night, restlessness, or sleeping more than usual. And also sleeping more than usual can start occurring as they age, so something to pay attention to there. There could be social withdrawal, or there could be Velcro behavior. Some dogs want to be more alone. Other dogs want to be extremely clingy. So these are all differences that you could notice, if you're going through this process with your dog. In a multi-dog home, if the leader dog dies, survivors often showed in the research extreme anxiety because they lost their source of direction, which that kind of makes sense. However, if there's multiple dogs and the leader passes away, another dog will generally step up and become the leader within that hierarchy. So that's something that should be happening, but maybe it takes a couple days for that to actually occur. And then some dogs, like we already said, they stop eating. This is generally because the drop in oxytocin means they don't get the normal reward feeling from eating. Food just doesn't feel good anymore, at least for the time being. So that's one of the reasons why that happens. Grief can also cause some other issues. So separation anxiety. If your dog is struggling with separation anxiety, sometimes it can actually worsen as your dog's dealing with grief. Sometimes grief can trigger separation anxiety. So it doesn't mean that your dog is just terribly missing the other pet. It potentially means that they are worried about being alone. And especially if you had like multiple pets and then all of a sudden you have one pet and you're gone more often or you're going to work or whatever, your dog has to get used to being alone without that other pet being there. So just something to think about. And I'm not saying to rush off and get another pet. We'll talk about the recommendations for getting another pet later in this discussion. But it does mean that this could potentially be something that you have to address if it becomes a factor for you. Now, there are some red flags medically if your dog is refusing all food for multiple days, or if your dog is showing self-mutilation, such as excessive licking or chewing, or shows zero interest in anything. This could be linked to the grief. It could be, which we'll talk about in a second, linked to you grieving. It could be spikes in anxiety, could be spikes in separation anxiety. But if you see these things, it's just going to be best just to, especially if you've had worked with a trainer in the past, go ahead, give them a call, tell them what's going on so they can help you, or call your veterinarian, let them know what's going on. You probably don't need to schedule a vet visit if your vet can do a phone call with you and talk to you about what's happening. There's also a bunch of resources online these days about grief in dogs, as this should be a resource for you. But this is a red flag that you might need to speak with a professional to help you identify some things that you could do to help your dog get over this situation, which may be identifying what you're doing yourself so your dog can reflect your own changes in behavior. Now, with that being said, the owner mirror effect. This was heavily researched in these studies, and the research shows a strong link between how much the owner is grieving and how severe the dog's behavioral changes are. Dogs pick up on our emotional state. We already know this. We've known this for a long time, that your dog is reflecting your energy. But if you are heavily grieving, which I'm not saying to not grieve, but if you are heavily grieving, your dog may be feeding off of that. So it is something you want to pay attention to and be aware of. So how do we kind of stabilize here? How do we stabilize ourselves and our dogs? Well, whenever you're dealing with a traumatic experience like losing a pet, even if you knew their time was coming, like they were getting older, their health was slowly degrading, this is still a traumatic time. So why routine matters more now than ever. Remember how we talked about dogs rely upon routine and rituals and rely upon habits? This is when you don't want to change your routine. When you lose a pet, when you lose a family member, your dog's social world is very important. It's like teetering. So their brain interprets changes to the environment or changes to the routine as a potential issue. So what you want to do is keep your routine as close to normal as possible. So get up at the same time, feed at the same time, go for walks at the same time, do training at the same time. Try to keep your routine as consistent before your other pet's passing as possible. And, with that being said, if you're really struggling, like I remember with my dog's passing, it was really hard. Fake it till you make it if you got to. Go on your walk. Go on your walk, do your walk. That's going to help you. That's going to move some blood around your body, get you thinking the right way. Fake it till you're able to be normal again, right? Keep the feeding times the same, walking routes the same, the type of food you're doing, the type of treats you're doing, the obedience drills you're doing, keep it all the same. Now, depending on your dog, depending on you, you may want to phase out your deceased pet's items a little bit differently. So some people like to gradually move things around or move them out. Some people like the beds being there. They like the water bowls being there, everything being there. That's totally fine if that's what you want. Some people want to move it immediately. That's totally fine too. Again, your dog is mainly operating off of your routines and rituals. So keep your daily routines the same as possible, even if you decide to move everything out at once or move it out over time. Now, the research that I looked into that did do some delving into dog parks, it found that grieving dogs are 1.3 to 1.8 times more likely to show increased fearfulness, and that forcing them into a high energy social setting can trigger fear-based aggression. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I will say every dog's different. Every dog's an individual. So if your dog is really struggling and showing different behaviors, I would kind of hold back on like high arousal situations like dog parks where there's other dogs running around, going crazy. If your dog's not ready for that, don't force them into that, right? You can stick to some one-on-one play dates with some of your friends. You can stick to taking your dog to the park and playing with your dog yourself. These kind of things. Do things your dog already know. Do things your dog already likes. Go hang out with people and dogs your dog already knows and trusts as they work through this situation and as you do too. So you want to also pay attention to actively re-engaging your dog, right? Remember how I said keep your routines and rituals the same as much as possible. One of those things is doing your training work. One of the things about training is it kind of forces your brain out of the emotional limbic mode and into problem-solving mode. So this is going to be good for you and your dog. So do your normal walks, right? Do your normal exercise. Also do your normal training. If you're having trouble with your training, just go back to the basics: sitting, downing, staying, come commands, touch commands, place commands, these kind of things. Do some low-level training, very easy to do, that you can enjoy, your dog can enjoy. This will help pull your brain and your dog's brain out of limbic mode and into problem-solving mode, getting the pistons firing again. Another thing that the research that I looked into that they specifically mentioned was nose work. They said that they found that it was helping the dog pull out of depression, dogs that were struggling with depression because they were having to use their senses and search things. Again, every dog's an individual. Some dogs may not even be into an activity like nose work when they're in this heavy grief stage. But as your dog comes out of that grief, maybe look into doing some nose work, right? If that's something you want to do. You can go to our YouTube channel. We've done plenty of find it training on YouTube. You can go to that. You can do that. But basically, as time is going on, you've done your low-level training, you've done your daily walks, now kind of move into some other activities that you and your dog find enjoyable. And, nose work is using the olfactory system. So the research that I looked into found 32% of grieving dogs, they lost the appetite, and so nose work games made the food more interesting again. So that worked for the dogs in the study. It may or may not work for your dog, right? Again, every dog's an individual, so look at your dog, listen to what I'm saying, and take that into account with your individual dog. All right. Two things that the study did that I thought were interesting. One, physical contact protocol. It was saying that long, slow strokes are more effective at lowering your dog's heart rate and your own than high energy petting, which makes sense. If you're sitting there petting your dog a lot, right, really hard, you could tell that how that could increase your heart rate. Whereas if you did longer, slower strokes, you just think about that motion. Your dog's laying next to you on the couch. You start their head, come down their neck, down their shoulders, down their back. Long, slow strokes. You're just sitting there. That's already going to bring your heart rate down, right? So that can help you calm yourself down, especially if you're dealing with your own grief, right? That can help you. And also spending time with your dog, right? Keeping the energy calm and steady because your dog is feeding off of yours. Now, with that being said, when my dog's passed away, I'm going on my daily walks and I'm struggling, right? I'm emotional because just the other day, my other dogs were there, right? They were all walking with me. Now I just have one. And I'm extremely thankful to have that one walking with me, but I'm missing those other dogs, right? So it's okay, right? You're going to grieve. It's okay to have those thoughts. It's okay to let those emotions come out, but keep your energy calm and steady as much as you can. One of the things when we're talking about managing your own grief, we already talked about the owner mirroring problem where dogs, they're kind of feeding off your energy. If you're in acute grief with anger or intense crying, that could increase your dog's stress. So one of the things you might need to do if you're finding that these emotional states are increasing your dog's stress, maybe you have to get some healthy separation from your dog for those emotional times. I have 2 kids, 2 young girls, and so when I was grieving from my dogs, I had to give myself some space so that they were able to not get stressed out themselves, right? My dog wasn't that stressed by me having some serious grief, but it was affecting my kids. So that's something to think about too. Kids feed off your energy too. But if you have a dog that's super sensitive to your energy and you're grieving really hard and you can tell it's increasing your dog's stress, that might be a situation to get some healthy separation, step into the other room, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do to have that moment. And, whenever you're working with your dog or walking with your dog, maintain a cheerful, neutral tone when you're directly interacting with them. Like we already talked about, steady, calm energy. Your dog needs you to be their stable point while their world is in chaos. You can grieve, Just manage how it shows up around them. And again, that's going to depend on your individual dog. Now, these studies that I looked into, they did have a list of things that they had found where the owners needed to actually see a vet. So again, I didn't deal with these myself, but maybe you are. So I figured it's good to talk about them. First of all, total anorexia, refusing all food for more than 48 hours straight. You really want to figure out what's going on there. Call your trainer, call your vet, right? See what they say. Self-mutilation, obsessive licking or chewing of paws. That's typically a sign of severe anxiety. So it could be anxiety from the other pet no longer there. It could be anxiety from the emotions that you're dealing with, and it's kind of like creating anxiety in your dog. So you could call a vet for that. Call your trainer, right? Persistent lethargy, no interest in movement or interaction, right? So your dog just is laying around, not wanting to get up, not wanting to go outside, not wanting to go for a walk. I feel like you need to make them do these things, right? You need to make them get up, go outside, go potty, go for a walk, right? Motion is lotion. It's good for the brain. It's good for the body. So get them moving, get them doing stuff, right? If it continues, call your trainer, call your vet. Make sure you're getting some advice from them on how to handle that. And there are some things, grief can mask or trigger actual medical problems. So there's also stress can trigger medical problems. So if your dog didn't have anything going on and then you went somewhere, you did something and it caused a lot of stress on your dog, that could trigger a medical problem. I've literally seen it myself. I know a bunch of vets that have seen it. So just be aware that if grief is going on or the stress of losing a family member, that could trigger a medical problem. So don't just assume that everything's just fine. Don't assume everything's just medical, right? Or emotional, or don't assume everything's emotional. There could be a medical factor. So if your dog is, having anorexia, not eating all of a sudden, it could be related to the grief. It could be because the stress from the grief has now caused a medical issue that wasn't there before. So that's why it's important not to just ignore things. It's important to call the vet, call your trainer, make sure you're taking all steps necessary to get everything checked out. So the question comes up, should you get another dog, right? This is something that the research that I looked into did address. And in 2025, the veterinary consensus was to wait at least 3 to 6 months before introducing a new dog. And they said that rushing to get a new dog backfires because the surviving dog's social hierarchy is still in a flux, and a replacement too early causes social friction and can cause aggression. Me, myself, personally, I don't really align with this thought process, what they're kind of saying. I think it's going to depend on you and your dog as to when you guys are ready. I don't think you have to wait 3 to 6 months if you want to. And also, I don't think you need to rush to get another one. If you feel like your dog is having some separation anxiety issues or anxiety issues because your other pet passed away and now it's by itself sometimes, that doesn't mean you need to rush to get another dog, right? Get another dog, get another pet when it's right for you and your family. Maybe you need to grieve a little bit longer. Maybe you need to kind of reset yourself before you're ready to take on that responsibility of another pet. And understand that if you get another pet, it doesn't replace the one you lost. You get a new dog, that's not your old dog. It's a completely new dog. So don't get it thinking it's just going to be like the one you just lost, and don't compare it to the one you just lost, right? Every dog is an individual. Every dog acts a little bit different. Every dog has different things going on. So just, pay attention to that and make sure that you're keeping that in mind. So what are the key takeaways here? First of all, every dog is different. Every dog is different. Every dog's an individual. Every dog is going to grieve a little bit differently. Every dog is going to deal with death and loss a little bit differently. Do dogs grieve? Absolutely. The research shows 86% show behavioral change with biological stress responses, right? But you may or may not detect that in your dog. Your dog may or may not actually grieve. Your dog may be thrown off by the change in routine. They may be thrown off by your own energy, like we already said. Dog grief is not human grief. Remember that dogs don't think about the past or the future like we do. They're reacting to their environment. They're reacting to the change in routine. Your job is to maintain calm and stability. Maintain your routine. Avoid forced things that your dog isn't enjoying. And it's okay to grieve, right? It's okay for you to take the time to grieve as you need to. Maintain your routine. Maintain the feeding. Maintain the walking. Maintain the training. That's going to help your dog, and it's going to help you too. And yes, it's a terrible thing that we lose our pets. You know, a lot of times this can hit us hard, just like losing a family member. And pets are our family members, right? But when you're going through this, I want you to think about the amazing time you had with the pet that you just lost, because you had an amazing life together. You gave them an amazing life. And I want you to think about, if you have a surviving pet like we're talking about, give them everything you can, right? If your other pet passed away from cancer that you weren't able to detect, and now you only have one pet, maybe you're able to put more resources toward early detection of cancer in them, for example, which is what happened with me. You know, my first dog passed away to liver cancer. We had never done any kind of cancer screening other than routine blood work. And, you know, Bane is my surviving pet, and now he's going for, you know, cancer screenings every 12 months for an ultrasound, and then every 6 months for blood work targeted at detecting cancer stuff. So, you know, maximize the time you have with your surviving pet, right? So I know it's a little bit of a dark subject today, but it's something that's been on my mind, right? Especially after going through what I went through last year. I know everybody that has a dog obviously is going to deal with this at some point if you haven't dealt with it already. And some people go through very traumatic deaths. You know, some people have to deal with bloat, unfortunately, and that can be very traumatic. Some people have accidents that happen. That's very extremely traumatic. So every death is a little bit different. But if you're listening to this podcast, you're trying to do everything you can to give your dog the best life possible and live your best life with your dog. And that's already more than most dogs could ask for. So thank you guys for tuning in today. Again, please leave your stories in the comments below. I love reading them. I love hearing them. If you have questions or feedback, leave it in the comments below. If you need dog training or you need someone to talk to about your pet or your grief, you can hit us up at the link in the description below, Canine Revolution Dog Training. We're happy to help. I did write a book. It's called The Ultimate Leash Training Manual, 5 Steps to a Well-Behaved Dog. It's available on Amazon and the link below in the description. If you want a good-to-go beanie like I'm wearing, or a good-to-go hoodie, or a Canine Revolution hoodie, a logo hoodie, you can go to Canine Revolution Apparel on Amazon or visit the link in the description below to get right over there. If you're looking for the optimal diet for your dog, you can go to WeFeedRaw.com. Use the discount code Canine-Revolution50 for 50% off of your first meal plan. If you're looking for the best supplements for your dog, you can go to CanineSuperSupplements.com and use the discount code Canine-Revolution for 10% off. And you can go to RawandPawCompany.com and use the discount code Canine-Revolution for 10% off there as well. And if you're looking for the optimal supplements for yourself, human performance, that's going to be JockoFuel.com, discount code Canine-Revolution for 10% off. So thank you guys again for listening. Leave your comments and feedback in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Pack Talk Podcast, out.